Well, a very happy Tuesday to everybody. John Hendrix here alongside Ross Jackson. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Second and Saints. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Ross, we've had an interesting Tuesday so far personally, but how you doing out there, buddy?
Oh, doing great, man. Glad to be here with you, and
Great.
glad to have like some semblance of normalcy for what today has been. Hope everything's going good for you too.
That's a bold statement to say there's sense of normalcy. It's been freaking crazy. But yeah, it's a nuts time, man. So greetings from Spain. That's
That's so
awesome.
cool.
Thanks for joining in for sure. So yeah, man, I'm glad to hear that. And it's getting warmer outside and stuff. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the poor Pels last night, that was tough to
R.I.P.
watch. But
Pels.
I
R.I.P.
mean,
Pels.
hopefully they get it together. That's all I can say. That's tough, but it is what it is. But at the
Yeah.
same time, Saints got a lot going on. We had our final day, a recap where we talked about everything, and obviously some things have happened since then. But we wanted to have a fair shake to kind of check out some of these prospects for the undrafted rookies, and so that's going to be the bulk of our show,
Mm-hmm.
really, for today. But the Saints had made some signings. Let's get to that first. But they signed Justin Herron and Shane Lemieux, offensive tackle and offensive guard. And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, probably guys that won't set the world on fire as far as signings. Some people might say camp bodies or anything like that. But I think Lemieux is probably a little bit more intriguing to me, just based off his time. The Giants didn't really work out. But what is your thoughts on the signings and kind of where this team is at in the offensive line?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I mean, I think Lemieux's probably the one that maybe you could see a little bit of a quicker trajectory to maybe being a depth player or something like that. Whereas like Justin Herron's coming in, neither of these guys have a ton of NFL experience, but they have played at the NFL level. Shane Lemieux started 12 games his rookie season, has a lot more experience in the zone run, kind of scheme because of his days at Oregon and Pac-12. They love them some wide zone offenses and all those other things. Herron's been a little bit more of a man blocker during his time with the New England Patriots and all that. And so, we'll see how either of these guys end up panning out. But if nothing else, it gives the Saints some bodies to be able to go out there with during, mini camps and all these other things to be able to kind of help out where you're not going to see, some veterans and things like that too ahead of camp. So I wouldn't have any humongous expectations on these guys. No disrespect to either of them. It's just about like team makeup, team building. How do you make it through your offseason and all those other things? These are 90-man roster signings more than they feel like 53-man roster signings, but there's still a chance for them to prove otherwise and potentially maybe even grab a spot if they have a nice camp in a system that maybe complements them more than where they've been before.
Yeah, I think you said it right. Is it's 90-man roster? You're building out that roster, and so what you got to know is that the team that they have now, all these players, is not going to be the same team that goes into training camp. Like you're going to have movement on probably the bottom 10% of your roster here, right? And
Yep.
so I think there's going to be some fluidity. You got the rookie mini camp that's coming up. They got some tryouts, some interesting names, obviously, in the undrafted guys, and so some of those guys will unfortunately end up getting cut, and they'll bring in some other guys that they like, and then there's always the free agent aspect that we really expect New Orleans to
Mm-hmm.
kind of be a big player on, and of course, Mekhi Becton, that's off the table now. We
Right.
didn't totally feel like that was like we thought that would make sense, but with them getting Fuaga, obviously it's not as big of a deal now, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you're going to start seeing more free agents signing because the compensatory formula is gone now and such. But is this team like kind of feel like they are starting to come together a little bit more? And we talked about some of the guys in free agency, maybe where we feel like they're going, but did this team need Mekhi back then in the first place?
Yeah, I think, you and I had talked about Mekhi Becton a couple episodes ago, just taking a look at like where they are now that they've kind of built out the offensive line. I don't feel like Mekhi Becton would have been as big of a fit because he's typically a right tackle kind of guy. And so now you're looking at the interior, Dalton Reisner, a reunion with Andrews Pete, all that. Bring in Shane Lemieux maybe takes you a little bit of a step further from that, from a depth conversation more than a starter conversation. Then you still have Nick Saldiveri in the room and all those things too. So yeah, I think that they're angling and they're progressing just like you would expect that they would. It'd be a big issue if they finished the NFL draft and you said, oh yeah, they haven't moved. They're not any more ready than they were before the NFL draft, right? So I think they've kind of naturally moved on. The other thing to keep in mind too is not only do we see teams now signing players because of the fact that the compensatory formula is no longer impacted by signings, but now you're going to see some new free agents hit the market because some teams have built out their roster over the course of the NFL draft. We actually already saw that this morning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Zay Jones being
Yeah.
one after the Jacksonville Jaguars signed, drafted every LSU player available and then started, filling out their roster at wide receiver. They moved on from a guy like Zay Jones. And I don't think that's
Oh,
going to be
man.
unique to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think we're going to see that around the league too. And Dennis Allen even highlighted that in his one of his post-draft pressers.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you saw Zeke go back to the Cowboys too and stuff like that. I mean, this is just
hysterical, by the way.
space. Yeah, which is hilarious.
Absolutely hilarious.
And so and it's funny because at this point in time, like I've never seen people get behind Andres Pete as much as they have like now that he's not on the team. It is
it's amazing.
Absolutely insane. And look, I don't know where Pete's going to end up, but I think it's a possibility. But I think you look at some of the other things like they tried with Trey Turner last year and he got hurt during camp, and they're going to try some of these other guys and stuff. And I think, again, this offensive line, there's going to be a wait and see type thing. And I don't know if you caught Rick Dennison chatting with Aaron Summers of the team and stuff, but really, really intrigued about him. And I think the biggest thing, we're going to get into these undrafted free agents. So again, stay tuned, but the biggest thing in hearing Clint Kubiak talking about the emphasis on the run game and such, and emphasis on play action, but Rick Dennison in particular brings a wealth of knowledge. Again, he worked with the Broncos a long time ago. That mile high salute, Terrell Davis, those types of days. If you know who Terrell Davis is, and if you don't, shame on you. But at any rate, like there's all these ties between all the coaches. Like it's not just Kubiak, it's not just Janako. It's all of them intertwined. So Dennison and Clancy Barone, all these guys. And so, John Benton as well. And so, I mean, it begs the question. I mean, everybody like Dennis Allen talked about how much that they valued these guys' input during the draft process and such. But again, I think there's a lot to be excited about because the only holdover was Clancy Barone. And of course, we know why. I mean, and Clancy's really, really smart, probably underrated for sure. But, this fresh perspective in the offense. They started phase 2 on Monday, which allows them to get on the field a little bit more, install more of this offense and such. But man, are we missing anything? Should Saints fans have a right to be really optimistic in kind of where their approach is? Or is it kind of like, let's pump the brakes a little bit and let's see what happens first?
Every fan for themselves, man. Like if you're going to be excited, this is the time to be excited, right? Like every draft class is nothing but all pros and pro bowlers, and every team's a Super Bowl contender. Like just enjoy this for a second. If you're a fan, like,
except
right. Yeah. Well, they didn't help themselves with their draft either. Kind of like the Browns. But I would say that this has been it's been a while since there has been a Saints draft class that has been as sort of positively received as this one has been. And their undrafted free agent class is really, really good. Like I really like the players that they brought in. There's several guys that have I feel like a pretty clear path to the roster and have a real opportunity here. And so I would say lean into the optimism and enjoy it. And then you can go back to being, pessimistic when they give you a reason. But one of the things that we've continued to say is they have to give a reason for positivity right now. And I think with this draft class and what they did over the course of this weekend, I think it's the most sort of positively inspiring thing that they have done so far. It's like the thing that inspires the most positivity that they've done so far this offseason. And I think that late plays in free agency can help to continue that.
Yeah. I was just laughing at this comment. If we get Dalton Rice off a streaking quarter, good luck with that. You might not make it too far, but
you might also fit in perfectly also. So you might have no trouble at all.
Sure. Yeah. But I think you bring up some interesting points. And again, I think that drinking the Kool-Aid, being optimistic and all that type of stuff, I think for me, it's just the fact and the willingness that they're trying to do something different, right? That they've moved on from some of those longstanding guys in the offense, and they're trying to put a new offense in. They're trying to do this. I think that speaks well for them. But, again, let's be realistic. The only two main contributors I see right now in this draft class is Fuaga and McKinstry, and that's not a knock on other guys, but Rattler's going to have to learn. He's going to have to beat out Jake Haener. Bub means he's going to have a little bit of an upward climb on his, and same thing with Jalen Ford and some of these other guys that they had and in such. And so Christian Boyd and Ezram, I mean, they got to climb up the roster, and it's not saying they can't, but again, the only things, and when we talked about the draft, we said they needed to come away with somebody who has the upside in starting, and the second player needs to be a significant contributor with upside starting. And I think they did come away with that. So I think there is a good reason to be excited about that. But as far as the rest of the draft, I mean, we're not going to know until a couple of years. And one of the things that I actually appreciated from Mickey was the fact that he was asked about evaluations on last year's class. He said, I usually wait 3 years to do that, which
Yep.
fair.
Pretty
I think
typical.
that is, because if you go off of last year, I think there's some reasons to be excited, but I don't know that you would have a definitive, evaluation of Kendre Miller or Isaiah Foskey or Nick Saldiveri. And so that remains to be seen. But the second year, that sophomore year for a lot of these players is going to be really, really big.
Yeah, I think you've got real opportunities for guys to maybe take those steps forward. I think typically, like when you look for whenever there's people that jump up into take a leap in their second year, you look for momentum. Who finished their rookie year with some momentum? A.T.
Yeah.
Perry's an obvious candidate, isn't he? Like, I
Yes.
mean, literally everything that he did last season was in the last 7 games or so of the year.
Yeah.
Pretty much starting in that Vikings game when things really started to take off for him. And then beyond that, like Kendre Miller had an awesome, finish to his season at the end. Brian Brzee kept up momentum all throughout his rookie year. So we're really excited to see him his second year. It's interesting that, like, I know we're going to be highlighting a lot when we talk about this draft class. We're going to be highlighting Fuanga. We're going to be highlighting Kool-Aid. But I also really think that, like, Christian Boyd has, I mean,
Mm,
just the path in front of him is wide open, isn't it? Like, I don't think
yeah.
I don't think in his rookie year he's going to eclipse guys like, a guy like Colin Saunders, for instance. I'm not trying to say that. But I mean,
Yeah.
typically this team keeps 4 defensive tackles. They invested a draft pick in him. They usually keep 4 on their active roster, and then guys like Heflin and stuff like that on the practice squad. But then, I mean, the spot's wide open. He's got no competition on his way there, basically, with the exception of the incumbent of Jack Heflin, who we should give a fair shake to when we talk about him, because it'll be his second year in the system. But then, just being like this big bodied run plugger, like 329 pounds, like you can't teach that. You can't teach that to
Yep.
anybody. And so it just feels like he's really got this path too. So it's interesting. Like, there's a good chance you get, by the end of the season, 3 guys who have started games for you by the end of the year, because, the idea of a starter on the defensive line is that everybody's a starter, right? Eventually
Right.
somebody's going to start a game because they're going into a heavy run formation, and it's like, all right, Boyd, go on and get out there, and everything. And so I think it's a nice class with a lot of that positivity, a lot of that positive momentum that we're talking about.
I'm so glad you brought up Colin Saunders too, because he put off a tweet earlier today and he says, I love it when y'all get me worked up, but it really gets me going. Watch this. And then put a couple emojis. I think people are already discounting and be like, oh, Christian Boyd's going to be the starter. And I'm like,
I don't
I
think
mean, and
he's
I
going to be
said, no, I
eclipsed
mean,
at
but
all.
you know
Yeah.
how it is. And again, we've talked about it. I think Saunders and Shepard were both better than what some people let on last
Yeah.
year. I mean, I don't think there was really too much to be upset about there, but I mean, you look at Boyd and Saunders, again, 2 guys that are bigger in stature that could plug the run. That makes sense a lot of times,
Yeah.
but again, I think this is the season where we hype everybody up. Everybody's going to go for the big play. They're going to make the Pro Bowl. They're going to do all this other stuff. And I mean,
Hmm.
I get it. I understand it. But if they get half of these guys and then a couple of these undrafted rookies, like I think there's more to it than Dolan, right? I think there's just more to it than him,
Hmm.
Holker. And so it remains to be seen, but I think that there's tough. And look, Luther brings up a good point. You never know, because of Colston
Right.
and Jari Evans, right? You just don't know, and so they could push some other people. And you just look at the positions and way they're stacked. I mean, there is a potential for some of these guys to carve out a role in the roster, but of course they've got to earn it. They got to
Yep.
show up. And the biggest thing, I guess, what would you say, since we talked a lot? I mean, we talk to rookies all the time. I think that's probably some of the vets too, but like by far, I think a lot of our interaction are with the rookies in some aspects,
Hmm.
especially last year. But what would you say some of their learning curve, like even talking to guys like Jordan Howden or Kendre or Isaiah Foskey, what were some of their learning curves like as the season went along last year?
Yeah, I mean, everybody talks about the speed of the game.
Yep.
I don't think that's untrue at all. I think that's very, very true. The speed of the game is just entirely different, of course. And the other piece of it sometimes is learning, sometimes you're brought into a role, you're brought out of college and then you're put into a role that you have to communicate in a way that you didn't have to communicate in college. And so now you're not only learning the system and learning things that might also be pretty standard or familiar to you, but now you have to learn how to communicate it, right? Like it's one thing to know how to do a thing, it's another thing to kind of help other people do it or communicate to people how to do it and all those other things. Like I think those are massive, massive kind of learning curves and stuff like that that you kind of have to go through. And so I think that becomes a big part. And then probably the other thing is just how to like manage, this is going to sound so cheesy, but how do you manage life as an NFL player? Right? Like when you're in
Lot.
college, you typically live on campus, you're there, you show up, you go to class. Now all of a sudden, like you live somewhere else. You're either being, shuttled in or you're driving in or whatever to the facility. You're practicing. And then when the day's over, how do you get in more work? Because practices are only allowed to be so much at the NFL level and all those other things. Like the CBA kind of limits all that kind of stuff. And so how do you do that? How do you like make your way in with this veteran who will do some film study with you and teach you this thing? Like, how do you find the extra work and stuff like that? And so I think a lot of people think a lot of times where it's like, oh, well, they don't have to go to classes. They don't have to do that. It's just so much easier. Not necessarily. It's just a different type of challenging. Like, how do you maximize your time away from the facility and keep yourself in a situation to where you're able to maximize yourself in an environment that's entirely new to you?
Yeah, and the guys that do it. I mean, like I remember Jameis talking about how much he worked with A.T. Perry and how much he stayed after practice to work with those guys and just
Yeah,
different
yeah,
players over the year. I mean, again, it doesn't seem like a big thing over the course of the year, but that's the difference between somebody like him and somebody who just comes on and just doesn't care, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing is you want to be able to put in the extra work. You want to be able to go the extra reps. You want to get as much film room as you can. You want to get as much tablet time as you can. And those who do it, you see it, right? And I think some of
yeah,
the problems the Saints had last year, especially, was a big emphasis is the tablet time, is the study time, and
yeah,
and
big
I think
time.
that was something that obviously it fell off a little bit, and so that is something that we've talked about it plenty about. The fact of them going to California and being more close knit and being more accountable, potentially being staying, around that area and such together is going to be beneficial to this team. And so we'll see how it works out, but in theory, everything sounds good on paper, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know,
Yeah, that's
but
always the tricky part, right? It's like how do
right.
you help people understand like, and this is the thing that I think a lot of people where sometimes we in media come up short in delivering like the correct expectation to how something is received. Sometimes what we want to put out is here are the things that this player is strong at, which give them the best opportunity to take advantage of the chance that they have to make a roster. And what everybody sometimes receives is here are all the reasons this player is definitely going to make the roster. And those are
Yeah.
two different things. And that's just on us to convey it properly. And that's why I like having conversations like this, because it kind of gets that pretense out there. And so I think the biggest thing to remember is that when we're talking about some of these prospects, we're coming from it out of like either conversations with people who have scouted them or because we personally have scouted them. And scouting is all about figuring out what a player can do, not necessarily worrying about what a player can't do. Because you're not going to draft a player and then have them do the thing that they can't do. You're going to draft a player and have them do what they can do. That was one of the things that I really liked about when Clint Kubiak was talking with Aaron Summers, which you can find that video on the New Orleans Saints YouTube page. He talked about how what the offense is going to look like is going to be based upon what the players bring to the table. Like they'll have a base offense that they'll install, but otherwise you're playing to the strengths of your roster. And I think that's
Yeah.
a really important
Really good
part to
point.
remember when you talk about all this too, or when you hear about all this.
Yeah, and I think that you brought up something too about the media's portrayal and stuff like that. And obviously that's what we are, but
Hmm.
I think that's where you've got to pay attention because a lot of people just say, okay, well, where's Isaiah Foskey? But the guy was he was dealing with two separate injuries. And
Right.
when people were going home over the holidays, he was there still rehabbing at the facility and stuff. And again,
Hmm.
that's not making an excuse, but you say, where's this guy at? And you get those injuries. If you can't work them out, you can't do it, then you can't maximize yourself as a player. And so it's not that Foskey just wasn't good or anything, but there's part of the truth of he was hurt, and part of the other part is maybe he did study a little bit too much and he didn't cut it loose like Dennis wanted him to and just go
Yeah,
play
a little
football.
bit in
And so
in his head. Yeah.
yeah, and you want to because you don't want to go out there and make a mistake. But and I get that. That's what the preseason is for and all that fun stuff. But I just think that there are some things that come up during the course of the season when most like 95% of these guys play hurt throughout the
Yeah.
season. Y'all don't see it, y'all don't know about it, but I mean, we see it. We see people putting stuff on their shoulders or their feet or whatever. And I'm not going to get into specifics, unfortunately, but I mean, we see it every year that these guys are dealing with all sorts of stuff. And so some of the stuff you keep in your head, some people it comes out, it just depends. Before we
Yeah.
get into these undrafted guys, just because I think some people tuned in last
Yeah.
last few days ago, and hit our segment on some advice, and so it was really well received. So I appreciate you guys doing that. But Molly asked a question here, without giving out too many trade secrets, but a valid
Mhm.
question. How do you get sources for football stuff? Do you just learn names over time, or do you tell people do people tell you who to contact? Again, without getting the trade secrets, what I would tell you is being a journalist is a lot of bit of relationship building. So that's the first and
Yeah.
foremost thing. Build relationships. We have access to some things that are help it make it a little bit easier, but the truth is not everybody's going to answer you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Some people will. Some people you build relationships based off of that. Some of it's about players, and some of it's about the relationships you have inside the building too. And so again, there's a lot of relationship building that comes with the process. And so the biggest thing I tell you is as you establish them, just make sure you're right, because you
Yep.
don't want to throw out false information, because that's what everybody's going to remember you for. And so when you swing, don't miss. That's the other part I would say. Any things that you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would say too, and Molly, I know you're an insider, Locked On Saints insider too, so we could have a more in-depth conversation as
There you
well if
go.
you want. I'm totally happy to do that. Like I'm happy, I think like sometimes it's hard to talk about certain things on these situations, but when there's a chance to do like the one-on-ones and stuff like that, like happy to help out. So make sure you reach out to me about that. But the other thing that I would mention too is just understanding the difference between when it's appropriate to report something versus when it's appropriate to just kind of like share like a little bit of
Huge,
information, insight,
huge.
and stuff like that. And so, how do you use something that you hear or that somebody has shared with you in confidence as a like report? Everyone should know this thing. For instance, I did like a confirmation on a Dallin Holker signing with the Saints and everything like that. Like that is a report, right? But then there are other times where you kind of use insight to kind of color what it is that you're sharing about, like what you think about a thing or what this might potentially look like and all that. So just having an understanding of that, because then that helps you when you are trying to develop sources and stuff like that, be able to utilize it in a way that's like that has that integrity and that you understand the difference of the integrity. And that helps a ton just in terms of building those relationships and all that. And don't go into every interaction thinking that you're building a source either. Like
Yeah.
that can become exhausting for people and everything. And so it really is just like understanding that there's a human element to all this, and that in every situation, no matter what, whether you're talking about somebody's play on the field, whether you're talking about a story, whether you're talking about a news breaking moment or whatever, that you are reporting on a human being. And so,
Yeah.
how do you do that in a way that is most respectful? And how do you do that in a way that is most advantageous of pushing something forward, not harming somebody, but moving a narrative forward and all that? And so, you kind of have to decide like where you fit into that space. But that for me is a big one.
Yeah, I'd echo that, because, and again, I'm not going to sit here and say we're the best at it. Of course, we're not.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I think that's a big part is going into locker rooms, and like one of the things I like to get to know people on a personal level. If they're
Hmm.
players, their families, do they have kids? Are they married? All these other things. What do they like to do? And all these types of stuff. Like you find out guys are gamers. Like Jamal
Right.
Williams is a big gamer. I know it
Shoe
seems like it,
collectors.
but yeah, shoe collectors and sure, whatever the case, or somebody played hockey. I mean, there's all sorts of things, but I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is treating them like they're human beings first and foremost. So I get it when people mess up or something, it's just like, well, they're players and all this other stuff, but there's a human element to all of this. And so
Hmm.
again, just start there. It's relationship building. And again, you're going to know, like people are going to know whether you're genuine or not, if you're
Right.
feeding them a line of bull or not. And so again, I think that's just part, but it takes some time. It's not going to happen overnight. Again, expect to probably get more ghosting than answers. And a lot of times when you do start to, I think that's another thing. But, when you get those people and stuff, it helps. And when I'd say caring about the little things too, like
Yeah.
Ross and I make it a point to cover HBCU. We don't, it's not like we have to cover the HBCU coverage, but I love covering it because there is relevance, first of all, for the Saints, and B, it needs to be promoted. And it's unfortunate they didn't have anybody that was drafted, but it's like those types of things going the long way, going an extra mile in some of those aspects do mean something. And so,
Yeah. I got some plans on that I want to talk to you about, by the way.
Okay, sweet.
So
I can't wait. I can't wait. Let's do it. All right. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes, or all that fun stuff with
meat
what
and
we
taters.
actually want to talk. Meat and taters. And let's talk about the Saints undrafted rookie class. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. If you want to have your daily dose of entertainment, we are here for that.
And Sling Blade
thank you,
references,
T.
we got you.
Yeah, thank you, T, for subbing, and we appreciate it.
And
guys.
thanks for the question, Molly.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for the question for sure. So let's get into it. Let's start with everybody's darling. So I watched some tape on it. I did some research, and obviously there is no bigger undrafted rookie free agent than Dallin Holker. And you talked about him as one of one. You talked about him a little bit early on, but I guess my question is to other people, and we asked it again, if it was so great, why didn't he get drafted? Did the Saints really get a steal? What's the vision for him? But your thoughts on Dallin Holker and maybe what he brings to the table.
Yeah, I also watched a little bit more tape too, and I think I have some more reasons on why he didn't get drafted, but why he's still a very good fit for New Orleans. So let's contextualize why he didn't get drafted first. John asked me that question a couple of days ago when we did our last episode, and one of the things that I mentioned was, well, I mean, he's kind of a guy that's a niche fit. Kind of H-back, move tight end type. Move tight end just means that instead of the tight end always being tight to the line of scrimmage, that they'll sometimes play in the slot, play out wide, play out of the backfield. You literally move them around. That's where that comes from. And so I think that because he's such a specified role, there's only a few teams out there that really utilize that. I mean, Isaiah Likely is a really good example. Baltimore? Yeah, Baltimore. Yeah. Brevin Jordan with the Houston Texans is a really good example. And then kind of Taysom Hill in New Orleans. And then there's, a few other guys every now and then and stuff like that. I'm shocked Miami doesn't have a little bit more of this in the Mike McDaniels offense, but I think it's only a matter of time. And so I think that that's a big part of it. And look, Isaiah Likely's still in the early portion of his career. Brevin Jordan's still in the early portion of his career. Taysom's going into year 34 in terms of his age 34 year in the NFL.
Yeah, level 34. I like that.
Level 34. Yeah, there you go. I say as a 34-year-old, I'm like there's something wrong here. But I think that there's like that piece where you're trying to be ready for the person after that. So while I know that there's other roles out there, the Saints might be the one that has that role, that's looking for the next person in that role and the succession plan. The other two things are size: 6'3", 234, 241 pounds, depending upon if you're looking at his combine or his pro day. Typically undersized for a tight end, right? You typically tight end wise, you're looking at 6'5", 6'6", something like that. Some teams will roll with the 6'4" tight end, everything. And then the other thing is blocking. He's not the strongest blocker. He's a willing blocker. He'll go out there and do it. He's not going to shy away from it or anything like that. But he's not always the most effective blocker on the field. And so that typically means that you can't get out on the field. So for him, just as much as all of the fun stuff is that you can do with him, if he can catch on to the system and develop, not dramatically, but develop a little bit more as a blocker, it makes him more of a threat when he's on the field because it doesn't give away or signal what it is that you're planning to do. You got to be able to disguise things. And so he's got to be able to block. And so I would say that those are probably the things that end up being the reasons why he didn't get drafted. But the reasons why he can pan out are because of all of the things that he can do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just for comparison, so the team lists him 6'3", 241, Jawan 6'4", 231, and Foster 6'4", 250. And so, like, you see, it's kind of like right in the middle of it and such.
There,
and so, like, he could lose 10 pounds. He could gain 10 pounds if he wanted. And, I mean, he's very close. And then if you throw in Taysom, he's 6'2", 221. And so that just throws everything out the equation. But I think when I look at Holker, one of the, and of course I wrote about all this stuff and such, but I think what stands about him is his ability to catch. Like what I was trying to explain is he puts an emphasis on catching. So like catching first, then
Mm-hmm.
worrying about everything else. So his hand placement is really good. I think he's a lot more athletic than he leads on and stuff. And so I think he has some strong awareness. I think that he's somebody that could be that guy. I was upset because I like Joel Wilson again last year out of Central Michigan, and he got
Mm-hmm.
cut like one of the first cuts. But I think Holker is a guy that when you look at offensive fit, though, I think he is somebody that could benefit from a play action style offense like this that's going to come in. And look, the Saints have a need, right? I mean, it's Juwan, it's Foster, and if they use Taysom, they're great. But behind that, it's Tommy Hudson and Michael Jacobson that are the guys on there, some practice squad guys from last year. And so I mean, it remains to be seen how that's going to work out, but I think it bodes well in his favor. But, he's going to have to pick it up at an NFL level. I think he's capable of doing that. But again, actions speak louder than words, right? And so
Right.
we do have some undrafted rookie interviews that came up. We got to talk to 4 players today, and so be sure to check out Second and Saints for that. It was Kyle Sheets, Jermaine Jackson, Matt Hayball, and Sincere Haynesworth from Tulane, which is like this guy's like Haynesworth without getting too much into him right now, but this guy is so likable. Like he seems like he just doesn't have a bad day and such. So, but let's go over to another free agent, Kyle Sheets, Slippery Rock, which is in Erie, Pennsylvania, right? In like Pennsylvania in that area. Big guy, 6'4", guy that, for me stood out is you throw him a 50-50 ball, he'll get it. He can win one-on-ones and such. What other types of things he can make a contested catch, but you asked him a couple of questions, maybe even moving to a tight end role and such. But what stood about him and what do you like about him?
Yeah, I think the thing about him is that like he got his first collegiate offer was from Slippery Rock. He went
Yep.
there. The first team to call after the draft to sign him as an undrafted free agent was the New Orleans Saints. He's on his way here. There's something about sort of like that loyalist feel that I think pushes the culture forward, right? Of like, I'm here because they called me, and there was no way I wasn't gonna show up. He said that he also is a willing blocker, which I think is really important when you're a guy that's some places he's listed 6'4", other places listed 6'2", but in any case, like he's a big wide receiver, right? In any case. And so when you're a guy like him that played a lot of time on the outside, but has some experience in the slot and is willing to play in the slot, you got to be able to block, especially in this wide zone type of offense, because you're going to see a lot of trying to attack the run game around the tackle, around the tight end on either side, which means you want to extend the offensive line as far out as you can. So having blockers at wide receiver allows you to be able to keep the play moving laterally, which I think is helpful. So that's a place where like he comes in and has a blocking role or something like that and excels there, like it puts him in a good situation. Come in, have a blocking role, show that you could do that, helps you out on the special team side too. And then your ability to be able to get in on all that. So I think that like those are the things that are really important to me when hearing him talk about his game. But I think that like you can feel the intellectual makeup of every single one of these players. Iziram, Jalen Ford, when we talked to him after the draft, Christian Boyd, like all these late round guys and the UDFAs that we talked to so far, they all have like the intellectual makeup and the desire, like the makeup of desire that says, I want to learn more. And I think that's one of those things where like, in order for you to develop, you got to want to develop. And all these guys clearly have a want for that. And Sheets really showed me that.
Yeah, it reminds me what you said, what he said about they offered and he came and such, or same thing with Slippery Rock. Reminds me of Nick Saldiveri. Like he had other offers to go play elsewhere, but Old Dominion was the one that stepped up to the table, and that's where he ended up going. And so again, we've long talked about the makeup of this roster and just kind of with the guys that the Saints are liking and valuing. And so I think there's some merit in that, obviously, for him. And so my only big questions with guys like Sheets and Mason Tipton of Yale is, how are they going to bode against press man coverage against somebody that a little bit more physical style? Because he can get open. Same thing with Mason Tipton too, which we can talk about him next since I'm bringing him up now. But that's what I want to see is, are they going to be able to get off that press man coverage? And for Tipton, he was strong part of Yale's receiving performance and such. And so again, I think that he's just somebody that, like, I was looking at some of the games that he had, and I'm like, why are they not putting safety help over the top for this guy? Because clearly he was a nightmare and a thorn in their side and
Yeah.
such. But he's somebody 5'11, 191. He's a little bit smaller compared to like Sheets and some of the other guys. But I think he's somebody that could eventually do something, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But he came on late in the season. He's got, again, the personality that you would like from him. But again, that's really my questions for guys like Sheets and Tipton. Are they going to be able to beat out some of that press man coverage? Your thoughts on Tipton?
Yeah, the other thing with Tipton too is just building out the route tree. I mean,
Yeah.
unsurprisingly, he wasn't asked to run a pretty expansive route tree at Yale, But this is a guy that was a starter from the moment he was a true freshman. He came in and immediately became a starter on that team,
Yep.
and so like you can see the drive, you can see all that's there. So I think building out the route tree is a big part, but his pro day is really the thing that kind of put him on the map. He ran like a 4.33 40 37-inch vert, like all these other things, showed his like short area quickness and his 3-cone drills and all that other stuff. Like just really, really impressive. And so I think you can see where you would be able to take advantage of that athleticism if you can get him out onto the field. But I think the biggest thing with him is going to be, can he diversify his route tree a little bit and show the ability to be able to, have a greater command of all of that. But he can get open, like you mentioned. He's got really, really good hands, like pretty safe hands too. But my biggest thing is, can he run the NFL route tree in such a way that, can expand his game?
Yeah, and for a lot of these guys is, can they do it quickly, right?
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
they adapt and learn quickly and then
Good
pick it
point.
up and then be able to last? That's probably the other part. And so, like, guys like Cy Barnett last year, I mean, he was somebody that was really
Hmm.
exciting, but I think that was probably a victim. Him and Joel Wilson too. Is just like, if you don't pick it up quick enough and you can't pick it up in the film room and such and do it on the field, then your life expectancy isn't as much
Yep.
as you probably could be. But I think that's going to be a big thing for him and obviously Sheets. But I like the concept of bringing on more wide receivers, and of course we know there's other free agents out there, and they're still trying to figure out this possession thing. But they have to figure out how to make it. And so Pelicans Nola says, I know it's Tipton can get off the coverage and the guy plays with swag. Yeah, he does have some swag and he can get off in
Hmm.
the coverage in some aspects. I just, again, for a lot of these guys, can they do it on an NFL level against NFL competition? That's the
Right.
biggest questions I have. Like Christian Boyd, it's the same thing with Trevor Penning. Like
Hmm.
NFL level style competition, how do you hold up against somebody like Arden Key, which obviously didn't go
Right.
well against them against the Titans? But those are the questions that I have for those guys. But again, we're going to find out really quickly for a lot of these. Another guy we talked to today was Matt Hayball from Vanderbilt. And so the Australian type punter. Here's what I would tell you. So, first off, it was interesting digging into him. He was the first punter All-American since 2016 or 2011, and the first Vanderbilt player to be an All-American since 2016. That's
Yeah.
pretty wild, to be
Yeah.
honest. So he's up for a Ray Guy Award. He was a finalist for it. Second team All American, all team SEC. Here's where I want to put it, and I'm going to make sure I get this right because this is what I wrote. So Headley last year had 5 games where he had this is college I'm talking about. So Headley's last
Okay.
5 games had 5 games where he had a long punt of 50 or more, and he had one game with a 61-yard punt. Now Hayball had 5 games of 50 or more. He had 5 games of 60 or more, and he had a 71-yard punt against Hawaii. That
Good.
is pretty
Yeah.
crazy. And so, and then what I said about him is the guy can boot it. And again, that goes back to the thing. Can he, the only question I have for him, can he adapt? Can he learn and do it the way that Phil Galliano and Darren Rizzi want him to be? And I think that's the biggest thing. But we got a legitimate punter competition here this season.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for
Again,
sure. Yeah. And I think you're getting like, this is going to be the conversation here over the course of the offseason. Hayball might have the bigger leg, but who's getting the net? Who is in a situation to where those punts are harder to return? And that's why both
yep.
these guys being sort of Aussie style punters is great, because you're going to get a real one-to-one comparison. This isn't going to be apples oranges comparison like it was Lou Headley and Blake Gillikin, right? Who are two entirely different styles of punters. You're seeing it go up against one another. But I think that Hayball had the better average and the better net last year in college than what Headley had in the NFL. And they're even still with punting in the NFL, there is still you have to prove you can do it at the NFL level kind of a thing, because the punts that the NFL returners are more willing to return and more capable to return are way more expansive than those that the collegiate players are willing to return and able to return. And I know, like, he gets a little bit of a boost playing at Vandy and punting against other SEC teams and stuff like that. But in any case, like, there's still a talent leap you have to make going into the NFL. It's not just you and the ball.
Yeah. And it's consistency too. I mean, again,
Yeah, great
it's
point.
like Blake Gillikin last year. I mean, it's just that it was days where like it looked good and days where it's just like, every fourth or fifth punt, it's just a shank or it doesn't look good. It's like, it wasn't the same type of kicks that he was having when, originally he was battling out for the role in the first place. And so, and again, and obviously Gillikin landed somewhere else and maybe that's what he needed, but that's going to be the big thing in camp. And you're going to see some of us with stopwatches jotting down the hang times and all that fun stuff and doing the nitty gritty when it comes to training camp. But again, I think his outlook is very favorable. And so I'm really curious to see what that ends up happening with him and such. But, punter competition, that's the main thing to take away. Another guy we talked to today, Jermaine Jackson from Idaho. You brought it up. We talked about it, but the coincidence of getting a small school return guy. Again, I said Malik Flowers last year. You had Rashid Shaheed, Deontay Hardy, all that fun stuff. But Jermaine Jackson, another guy, he's undersized, 5'7", 170. That's not going to completely hurt him, but more of a guy that go play in a slot. But he didn't have the speed to showcase on his pro day. It was only like a 4.59, but he made up for it with some of his strength. Like he did 17 bench reps, 225. So, man, guys, if the kickoff role, I think when you look at it, I can definitively say Rashid Shaheed's going to be there. But when it comes to who the other guy is, I don't know. That's a question the Saints are going to have to answer. But your thoughts on Jackson and maybe what he's going to be able to do, and does he have a legitimate shot just based off the special teams aspect?
Yeah, special teams always helps you as a UDFA and everything like that. He'll have to show it, but it definitely always helps. You talk about even as a punter, there's definitely still a gap. As a returner, it's tough. Like, the game is so much faster in the return game, even with the new return rules. Like, once you catch that ball and those guys are bearing down on you, it's an entirely different speed. Like, the game is just wild different than in college. But the thing that I actually really liked about him, and that I think the coaching staff will like about him, because they pay attention to these interviews, is the fact that, like, unsolicited, I asked him about playing in the slot, and then he was like, yeah, no, I did a lot of stuff playing in the slot. One of the things I really enjoyed doing playing in the slot was like developing as a blocker. About 5'6", 5'7" dude. And the first thing that he says about playing in the slot is, yeah, I like blocking. Like, that's awesome. And you could, either you're saying the right things, but if you're doing the right things and you show that throughout mini camps, training camp, like whatever opportunities he gets and stuff like that can go a long way for him, man. That really, really can. And if he goes out there and is like, yeah, no, I'm not just here to return, but I'm here to be, a wide receiver, which includes all of the different facets of being a wide receiver, could be a lot of fun. You don't have to be fast to be a good kick returner. You don't have to be fast to be a good punt returner. We actually saw that years and years ago. I know his career didn't pan out the way that the Saints wanted it to, but Marcus Murphy. He wasn't a fast dude, but he brought back a touchdown. I mean, like, he had some good returns. Yeah. And he had some good returns because he understood how to attack the angles and how to, how to make angles tougher for defenders and even run through tacklers and stuff like that. And so if you can show your ability to be able to do that, then I don't think that the 40 time tells the full story of a kick returner. Like you said, there's so much more that you can do. And then he goes out there and shows like, yeah, I'm willing to go out there and block. Like, even if he goes out on the practice field, blocks and loses, but shows that he's going out there to block, like that can move the needle for you.
Sure. The Bart Simpson, at least you tried cake,
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And one other thing he brought up too was the fact that he and DeAndre Carter are really.
Oh yeah, that was really cool.
And DeAndre Carter's been in the league since 2015. I mean, he's been with a lot of different teams. He's with the Raiders right now, but again, a guy that's similar, 5'8", 190, and just having him as a mentor, a guy that you can lean on. I mean, those things do matter too, and so he's just somebody, again, for everybody. I think that they're guys worth paying attention to. Of the guys that we've talked about right there so far, Holker and Hable, are the first two that I think have a legitimate shot at making the roster right now,
Mhm.
and so we'll see. But as we keep going down some of these, let's go to Kyle Hergel, interior
Okay.
offensive line
Oh,
from
yeah,
Boston
yeah, yeah.
College. So he was a transfer from Texas State. 30 bench reps at BC's Pro Day. He actually was not credited with a sack in 2023. Only allowed two hurries. My notes on him: he stands up fairly well in pass protection. Can get to the second level pretty well. 6'2", 315. Originally from Canada, and he was a late add to the East West Shrine Bowl, and he was actually number 4th overall in the CFL draft ranking. So if he wasn't going to get on an NFL roster, he was the 4th ranked best prospect for the CFL. So your thoughts on Hergel, and of course there's not a ton of tape that you can see on some of these offensive linemen, but there's some.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's easy to find him when you're on it. That's for sure. The thing I like about him is that he's explosive, like really, really explosive, and explosivity matters on the offensive line. There's a defensive line where we talk about explosion all the time. Your get off, the ability to be able to do all that and everything, but like you got to be able to counteract that over on the offensive side.
Yep.
And I think he just gets off the ball like very, very quickly and everything like that. And that's one of the things I really like him. And the thing about it is that he gets off the ball with power, right? Like he shoots his hands really well, all these other things. But you can kind of see it in his testing metrics. You look at the explosive metrics like vertical and broad jump. Both of those were in like high percentiles for him. And I think that shows you just the ability to be able to have sort of that base strength to be able to be strong up in the upper body, right? Because you're trying to transition power from your lower half to your hands, basically, and your arms. And so I think he does a good job of that. I think he's got a taller ladder or a steeper ladder, if you will, to climb, steeper hill to climb than some of the other guys that we've talked about so far, like Holker
Yep.
and Hayball. But no, I think that there's something interesting about what he brings, and interested to see if he's able to transition.
Yeah, and we're talking about interior offensive line, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that you should put an undrafted rookie as your starting left guard,
Yeah,
but
right,
at the
right.
same time, you're talking about, if you're going to make the arguments about like guys like Jari or Marquez Callaway, but Marquez
Quiz.
Colston, yeah, Quez, it's Quez, and if you're going to make those arguments, then you never say never, and it's again, if he can pick up this offense really quickly, then it does bode well for him. And
Mm-hmm.
it's again, I'm going to say that probably for everybody, but it's the ability to pick up, process, and then go do it out on the field. That's the
Yep.
main things for all of these prospects. So we'll see. Keeping down here, I'm going to jump over to Isaiah Stallberg, the
Oh, sweet.
linebacker from
Yes.
South Dakota State. Man, I tell you, this is one of the guys I'm really excited. This is another one that's on my radar. So he's listed as a linebacker. He's 6'1", 215. So obviously I want to know what the vision is for him, but he was actually started out as a safety and moved to a linebacker, and they used him as a flex player. The Jackrabbits of South Dakota State did. He was originally from Nebraska, and so he did stand out on special teams, which bodes well for him early on, but this is a guy that he rushes, he can tackle, he can do a little bit of everything, and he can cover, obviously, but a hybrid player, again, I made
Mm-hmm.
the comparison the other week about it, like bringing up a guy like a Sua Cravens and stuff before that was
Oh,
really a
yeah.
thing. I mean, again, I'm not saying he's that guy, but very interesting because of his stats, where they're going to put him. I think maybe more of a safety, obviously,
Yeah.
and is where he's going to go. But bring him in the box, do some different things. But this is a guy I'm really excited. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, good explosion, 37.5-inch vertical, good speed, 4.49. Like he just tested really, really
Yeah.
well. And I think that even when you look at his like RAS, his relative
Mm-hmm.
athletic score from Kent Lee Platt, I think he actually did it as safety, and it's like 9.50, everything like that. So welcome, right? We're back to that, to the athletic testing and everything. But yeah, it's always interesting to kind of get these guys that have experience at multiple levels on the defense, because that allows you to be able to utilize their versatility. A safety that can play down in the box, that's helpful. A linebacker that can play deep, that's helpful,
Yeah.
right? And you would never ask a linebacker to do that, but you can ask a safety to do all of those things and all that. And so if you're able to get him in the slot on coverage and get a bunch of opportunities to look at him, like one of the most important things that you can do as an undrafted free agent is be able to be looked at several different positions in several different places and everything. And so he's somebody that played 141 snaps in the box, 381 at slot corner last year for the Jackrabbits. And so he even played a little bit more of that hybrid safety role than he did play the full-time linebacker role towards the end of his career, which is collegiate career, which is good because it's clear what he was going to transition to at the next level at that size and stuff. So, yeah, I just think, when you have that speed, you can check the box of range. When you have the ability to play in the slot, I think that's really helpful. Do the Saints have a starting slot cornerback this year? We don't know. You know what I mean? Like, could be Alante, it could be Ugo, it could be somebody else that's not on the roster yet. Like, trying to build out, if nothing else, your depth there. Yeah, Tyron. If building out even your depth there for your practice squad, like, then being able to kind of be seen in all these different places definitely helps.
Yeah. And again, that's one of my guys that I'm really excited to see, and hopefully don't jinx him and be like he's going to be the first one cut. But again, I just think that he's an exciting player that could have a role, and of course he's going to has special teams upside, so that gives him a leg up in a lot of ways too, in my opinion. And so again,
yeah, safeties, linebackers, tight ends, yeah, and like with the new kickoff rule, like safeties, linebackers, tight ends become really, really important.
Oh my, yes, exactly. All right, let's move over to Rico Payton from Pittsburgh State, which is in Kansas, not Pittsburgh like you're thinking of. He's one of the Saints' top 30 visits. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, was it Jermaine Jackson who said he was a top 32?
Yes, he did. Yeah,
yes,
he said he was a top 30
top
as well.
So little nugget there. If you and again, if you want to watch some of those interviews, we had 4 of them today. So go on Second and Saints and check those out. But guy was transferred over from Southern Illinois, Rico Payton, that is. Again, all MIAA his junior year, a Cliff Harris Award guy, Don Hanson, All-American team. I think for him, really what I'm looking at, he's 5'11", 188. He didn't have a great 40, so like 4.57, but he also made up for it in like the agility and his jumps at Pro Day, and he ended up turning in like an 8.36 on his RAS. And so I think he's more of your outside corner. You can see that he has a frame that's a little bit different, but a long frame in some aspects. And so I think that he's a guy that could cover. But again, he has some ball skills. What's your thoughts and original thoughts? Original thoughts or origin,
additional thoughts?
Additional thoughts or initial thoughts, maybe. I'm sorry, I need my second cup of coffee or third, fourth, fifth, whatever one I'm on.
Yeah. No, you're good. Yeah, I think like the ball skills are the most intriguing thing about him. Like if he's going to make a roster somewhere, it's going to be because he shows some production in that lane and then also shows some production as a tackler in special teams. I think that's going to be his most direct way to do it. I think the fact that the Saints brought in 2 undrafted free agents that were top 30 visits for them, which again doesn't mean top 30 prospects. It just means 30 visits where you can have a guy come to your facility, but it clearly shows some interest. I think there's clearly something that they really like about him.
Yeah. And again, you got some good teachers back there, and Dennis Allen's a secondary coach. Joe Woods is there, and obviously Marcus Robertson is one of our favorites. And so, take the coaching, and the opportunity could be there. And they've found some undrafted rookies plenty of times over the years that are DBs. And so I think there's a legitimate chance for a DB to make the roster that's an undrafted rookie. And in worst case, one of the things that Dennis Allen talked about is these are also guys that they're going to consider heavily for the practice squad. So, I mean, that's where you had your Shaq Davises, your Mark Evanses and stuff like that. And so, again, it's going to matter, but, you can only put 16 on them right now. You can't do them all. And so, you got to last, you got to be available, you got to learn, you got to perform. So we'll see. Nori Newili, offensive lineman from Nebraska, will be my next one that I want to do. He started off at Colorado State, came over to Nebraska. He didn't play in 2022 because he failed a drug test, but man, he came back in 2023. He helped Nebraska finish second in the conference in rushing. He's actually played under Matt Rule, so everybody knows who Matt Rule is and such. He's originally from Germany. He played left and right guard for the Cornhuskers. And so, again, he molds his game off of Quentin Nelson, which Quentin Nelson is pretty dang good. And so if they can get a player of that caliber, that would be pretty awesome. But your thoughts on Nori and what you saw from him?
Yeah, one of my favorite things about him actually was reading our good friend Amy Just, who used to be here on the New Orleans beat, who now covers Nebraska. She wrote a senior feature on him, and just what an incredible dude. Like, kind of like the bounce back of the adversity and everything like that, but also just a very open book. His family, there was stuff in there from his family, and it's just incredible to see that support system and everything that he has too. So I'm really excited to talk to him, just like human being
Yeah,
wise. But
very
him
smart.
on, yeah, and
Carries
then him
himself
on the
well.
football, and then him on a football field, uh, like athletic, like really, really athletic. And if you want to get a good offensive line going, you got to draft and bring athletes into the building.
Yeah,
And those
yeah.
specific athletes might not make the roster. Those specific athletes might not be your starting five, whatever. But those specific athletes give you an idea of what it is that you want to see from your offensive line. And I do think that getting athletes on the O line is really, really important. And he's a guy that kind of checks that box for me.
Yeah, and again, the competition on that offensive line is wide open, and
Yep.
so we're gonna find out again. Are they built for NFL level competition? And we'll find out and get our answers very sooner rather than later, to quote Sean Payton. So,
Hmm.
Nathan Latu is the next one, edge from Oklahoma State. He's the brother of Cameron Latu, who was drafted last year by the 49ers. He's actually his fraternal twin brother. 6'4", Oklahoma State guy. He didn't start actually until this last year. So, like the previous seasons before that, he actually was just kind of like a role player and stuff. But 6'4", 265, which is actually almost identical to
Right.
Carl Granderson and Chase Young, which I think is the first thing to put out there. Speed stood out for me a little bit on
Hmm.
it. Again, but he's not like the fastest guy that you ever seen, but he has the pass rush traits that you would expect. He can shed blocks. He's got good burst, hand placement, and such. But it's a crowded spot. But the Saints, I mean, Carl Granderson was an undrafted guy. Your thoughts on
Hmm.
Latu and maybe what he could do? I think Latu's a little bit underrated in my opinion.
He is my other guy that I think can have a path to this roster, whether it's practice squad or as a as a guy on the 53. And the reason why I feel that way is because he to me is in the mold of a Caden Ellis, a Zach Bond,
Mm,
a guy that you can stand up on the edge and have him rush. He can put his hand in the dirt if you want him to as well. But I love the idea of having just another one of those speed rushers for this team to look at as a part of the rotation. You already know what the edge rusher is going to look like. You've got Cam Jordan, you've got Carl Granderson, you got Chase Young. You'll see what's going to happen with Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey. But man, if you can get, and this is something that Dennis Allen talked about at the end of last season and kind of held true to from every other time that we talked to him over the course of the offseason draft, all that stuff, is that the Saints aren't going to change their prototype in terms of how they draft defensive ends and edge rushers, particularly in the first round. But they're not going to be against breaking the mold every now and then to add to that prototype. And I think
yeah,
Nathan Latu is one of those guys that, as close as he is to Carl Granderson, as close as he is to Chase Young, like he kind of adds to the additional prototype because even Carl Granderson has bulked up since he's gotten to the NFL and he was
big
playing
time.
at like 280 for a little bit and all these other things too. And so Latu is another one of those guys that comes in with like the smaller frame, the sleeker frame, the ability to be able to rush off the edge with speed, which I think is nice to add to this New Orleans Saints defense and kind of replicates the success, hopefully could replicate the success that you saw from guys like Bond and Ellis or some version of that to kind of add another element to this team's ability to rush the passer.
Absolutely. It's not a bad thing to have more pass rushers for sure. So,
Right.
um, moving along, Millard Bradford from TCU safety. I think the biggest thing is so again, I'm gonna give you my notes and so it's he's inconsistent is the problem I think
Yeah.
that faced him the most. But he's not the fastest guy. He's not the most physical guy. He has some really good tape out there. He can come downhill. He has good closing speed. He can make a good strong tackle. The inconsistencies there. He can be good in run support and have good coverage, but then there's a play where he's not so good in coverage and run support and such. I mean, he's a guy that can take chances. He's not afraid to take a chance. But I think for him, one of the things that I noted is he just needs a good coach.
Yeah.
And a guy like a Marcus Robertson could unlock him. Your thoughts on Bradford and maybe what he's able to do for this team and what he needs to work on?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing with him is reeling him in a little bit.
Yeah,
Really aggressive on the field. Not like in a situation that's going to draw penalties or anything like that. Like he's not out there like yelling at teammates or
no
anything like
Brandon
that. But I just
Browners.
mean, yeah, no, not at all. Not even in that conversation. But like I
Sorry,
think
guys.
like Yeah, but I think like taking like this was a big thing about CJ Gardner-Johnson when he came into the NFL as well, was reeling in the aggression because he would make some tackles that were a little bit undisciplined, and there was a concern that he might
Yeah.
even hurt himself making some tackles and stuff like that. I see a little bit of that in Bradford's tape, but you don't. But the thing about it is that like you want controlled aggression. You don't want to lose the aggression and stuff. And so that's why a guy I think like Marcus Robertson is going to be so important to his process, because like Marcus Robertson was an aggressive dude on the field, but he was so controlled in the way that he did it. Like he fought for footballs. He would crash down and undercut routes and do all the things that you want to
Mm-hmm.
see from an aggressive defensive back and an aggressive safety in particular. But he did it in a way that was controlled. He didn't do it by like wildly, flying and leading with his head and stuff like that. Like you got to be careful with certain things. And I think that like that's one of those things that I look at in Miller Bradford's tape. I'm like, oh man, if he could just reel in the aggression a little bit, control it, and kind of use it as a tool as opposed to his, bread and butter or whatever, it would help. And then I think eye discipline. And look, the Saints have done a really good job reeling in and training eye discipline. They kind of use those visors for the defensive backs during training camp and everything. That was an MROB thing that they brought in, and he kind of has them, wearing these little visors so that they could focus on what's happening in front of them,
Mm-hmm.
not get,
That's a
it's just in
good
the
point.
individual drills. Yeah.
That's a
And
very
so
good
like,
point.
and that trains the eye discipline quite a bit. And so I think that like they've done a really good job of correcting that, because it's been an issue for them over the course of years and got much better last year. We still saw some glimpses of it, but just under 1 year with Marcus Robertson, they got way better in that conversation. I'll throw Joe Woods into that too, because he
Mm-hmm.
works with that secondary as well. And so I think that like the things that he has that might limit his game are things that the Saints should be able to address, but we're not really clear yet on what his ceiling is, even if those things get addressed. But if you're going to get the best out of him, I think those are the ways that you do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason TCU had success too. I mean, he was
Yeah.
obviously a big part of that and such.
Yeah.
And
Him and
I
Mark
mean,
Perry,
kind
man.
of,
Like both those guys
yeah.
were solid.
I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Smoke Monday situation potentially
Yeah.
coming in. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I'm not saying he's become a fan favorite or anything like that, but maybe that type of vibe, and just needs to learn and get coached. And maybe he
And
has
I,
the. Go ahead.
and I think he's a little bit more all around than Smoke Monday was. Like
Yes.
Smoke Monday
Oh,
was a
very
really good
much.
tackler and a really good special teamer, but he wasn't a coverage guy and
Yeah.
everything. And like, Bradford's got range, which is really nice.
Yes, absolutely.
He just
All
doesn't
right,
have as cool a
moving.
name.
No,
Although
of
his
course
name
not.
is pretty dope. It does sound like a president.
Bradford,
Like 16th,
Millard
yeah.
Bradford.
16th president of the United States, Miller Bradford. Like what I mean? That's what it feels like I should be saying when I talk about him.
Oh man, don't tell him that to his face. That's not good.
I mean, at least I compared him to
you can
Abraham
joke
Lincoln.
about it.
You know what I mean? At
Yeah,
least I put
sure.
him at 16.
Yeah. Oh man. Moving along, we got a few more to knock out before we finish up and wrap up. Sincere Haynesworth from Tulane, local guy. He was another one that's an interview out there. That's already out there on Second and Saints who we talked to. Man, this guy's he's happy. Like he's the
Oh my
type of guy
gosh.
that strikes me as not having a bad day type of
Yeah.
guy, like just nothing but a smile. And I think the one thing that I liked about him is, and I asked him because Tulane wasn't so hot for a while, and they just turned this program around a couple of years ago, and he was a big part of it. And he was talking about obviously big teammates with Tajay and Dorian Williams and such, and Nick Anderson and Michael Pratt, Jaquan Jackson, but he said how much they valued guys like him and his input. But a team captain, played a lot of interior offensive line, is where he's probably going to project the most. But I mean, again, he has good fundamentals. He seems like he can go against the run with take the angles and stuff. Again, I think he's got the physicality to hold up in pass pro. Your thoughts on Sincere and maybe what he's going to bring to the table?
Yeah, biggest question mark on him is going to be size. 6 foot, 300 pounds. Like it's a little tough. Not less the 300 pounds part, more so the 6 foot part. But being a guy that specializes on the interior and has played all along the interior, height is a little bit easier to manage, right? And so especially if you can utilize that for your leverage, then I think that ends up going a long way for you. Could be, one of those local prospects that sticks for sure. He's an interesting dude. And again, he's another one that just exemplifies the idea that like attitude means so much. And that attitude is really important, because if you want to develop, if you want to get better, you have to have a desire for it. He is clearly a dude that has a desire for it.
Yeah. And I mean, Saints kind of do try to give some chances to those Tulane guys. Nick
Yeah.
Anderson was one recently. Jalen McCleskey
Mhm.
is another one I remember. And so,
Oh yeah, yeah.
again, you're gonna see what they bring to the table. And again, you just gotta come in. But it's cool that he got to stay close to home. So I think that was
Mhm.
really fun to see. But really fun, dude. Like you watch him, is like, man, I can probably get behind this guy. You know what I mean? That's the
Mhm.
type of vibe that I got. Moving along, one of my guys that I kind of really like is Kyler Ball from Minnesota, interior
Yeah.
defensive line. So he was a transfer over from Houston Baptist, where he played 2019, 2021, past 2 years with the Golden Gophers. Team captain. He did 3 tech. He wasn't limited to that, though. He played in the interior at multiple spots. He anchored as a nose. Good awareness, can shed off some blocks. He can get into a play, disrupt a play, keeps his heads up and stays engaged with the play. So things that you like. And look, he's got some pass rush ability, go along with some run defense. He's quicker than a guy that you'd probably expect out of somebody that's 6'2" and 305. But your thoughts on Kyler Ball and what you saw from him?
Yeah, I was over here smirking because I was like, man, I can't wait to say that he ran a 4.9640 at 302 pounds. Like, goodness, man. Like, yeah, move. And
Yeah,
this is
he's faster than somebody that think.
this is one of those guys where, like, when Dennis Allen was I asked Dennis Allen about Josiah Zerum and him transitioning from defensive line to offensive line. What kind of does that give him? And one of the things that DA said, kind of with a smirk on his face, was, I tend to think that defensive linemen are more athletic than offensive linemen. And I think that, that's the
Not
defensive guy
wrong.
in him talking, but he's also not wrong. And so when you see a guy like this that's 302 pounds, it's moving 496, like, that's pretty remarkable, man. Like, this
Yeah.
dude can move. And when you're coming from an offense like Minnesota's, which obviously a Big Ten offense, they love to run the football. And then you have somebody that can move like that, like, goodness, like, you can really see the way that, like, he's a guy that could benefit from the scheme that he's walking into quite a bit, because he would be walking into exactly that kind of scheme that wants the offensive line to be able to move off the football and be able to get out there and run and all those other things, and everything like that. And so when you're playing against those teams, rather,
Yeah.
and everything, and then you're having to defend those types of offenses in the NFL, for his case, like, that's something. So when he's practicing against this offense with the New Orleans Saints, he gets an opportunity to really show what it is that he's going to be able to bring to the field if he gets the opportunity at defensive tackle, which is one of those spots that, look, you're going to want guys in the practice squad. You're going to want those guys. So if he can come out there and be the defensive lineman that has all that athleticism and practice against the offense that wants to be athletic, like, that could potentially move his development quite a bit.
Yeah. And you said rushing, you changed it up, but inject a Colin Saunders rushing TD into my life for 2024.
Yeah, let's get
Please.
that. Yeah, let's get that.
Please. I need to see it. That was really funny. So, but again, he's one of my guys to keep an eye on, as far as maybe a dark horse. And so
Mhm.
we'll see. And, sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. Moving along, got 3 more left. Lawrence Johnson, defensive back from Southeastern Missouri.
Mhm.
SEMO, St. Louis
The little
native,
SEMO
6
guy.
foot, 205. He was in the Hula Bowl. Look, he played quarterback in high school. And so it wasn't until college that he started playing cornerback. And so he's good in run support. I think he played all over for the Red Hawks. So he played in corner, he played the nickel, he played in the
Yeah,
slot, he
that
played
was my
back
big note
end, he
on him.
played strong safety. So one of the things he said, and that I picked up on, is that his experience playing quarterback helps him diagnose plays better, faster,
Mhm.
and better. And so again, and for what's crazy in looking to him, he actually led the Redbirds in sacks last year with 4. That's crazy for a
Wow.
defensive back. That's pretty
Yeah.
nuts. But like I had my notes on Bradford, I think he's a guy that just needs a little bit more coaching to
Mhm.
unlock his potential. But I like the guy as a prospect. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, my big thing for him was his versatility. And so
Yes.
it's the versatility of being able to play multiple positions, but also serve multiple roles, right? Like, you can
Mhm.
play free safety and corner and slot corner and still only be charged to cover. But his ability in run defense as a run support guy, his ability to pursue the passer, as you just mentioned, with those 4 sacks, like, those are all things that build his ability to contribute and to build to all the different ways that he can contribute. And then the other piece of it too is that, like, typically if you're a safety that can play downhill the way that he can play, you're perfectly suited for special teams work. And so again, as an undrafted free agent, you're trying to make the roster sometimes through special teams. And he seems like a guy that has at least the base skill set that says, okay, that should be able to translate.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, he's a guy that maybe not a ton of things out there, you know what I mean? And so but I'm excited. I'm excited for defense back. I'm excited for a lot of these guys. And so again, are they going to stick around? Because those free agent tryouts are going to produce and knock some of these guys probably off the roster, knock some other ones too. So we'll find out. Got two left. Jacob Cabote from UL Lafayette. I'm from Lafayette. I know UL Lafayette, but walk on for Raging Cajuns. So he actually played for TAMU, the Aggies, first couple of years, and then he transferred over. He went in the transfer portal, but didn't get to play in 2020 because of COVID. And so that was unfortunate. We've seen that happen. But last year with the Raging Cajuns, he did fairly decent job and finished with 729 on the ground, 5.7 yards a carry, 7 rushing touchdowns, 9 catches for 79 yards and a score. My notes on him: he has some pretty good vision and he has some good acceleration when he hits the second level. Shows some nice moves that you like out of a running back. Your thoughts on Cabote?
3.22 yards after contact on average last year. That's the big thing for me, right? He's not the fastest guy. Comes in at like a 4.6 something in terms of his 40 time. But I like the fact that like he can utilize his size to pick up additional yardage and have sort of that impact. Of those 729 rushing yards that he had last year, 416 of them, so more than 50% of them came after contact. So I think that's a big thing. That's somewhere where the Saints struggled a lot last year.
Oh my gosh.
They struggled a lot last year. It was, and a lot of it was, and a lot of it was, like, in my opinion, a lot of it was scheme related to me. You've got these, you had somebody like Alvin Kamara running between the tackles more than he was running outside. You're not getting him out in space and utilizing him. You're putting him into the mix. And so, his yards from contact are going to come down because you're running him in the middle and stuff like that. And so that to me is kind of a big one. And then the last thing that I'll mention is him as a blocker too. Like that was one of the things that kind of stood out to me on tape. Like he was pretty good at assisting in the backfield as a blocker.
Yeah, and that's an area where I don't think a guy like Jamal Williams got a lot of credit. Like he was actually really good against picking up blitzes and stuff. And I know he didn't do a lot on the stat sheet, but that matters. You know what I mean? That's where Mark Ingram shined for a little bit sometimes too, in addition to being able to run and stuff like that. And so, again, could he make something of himself? We have to find out. It's going to be a crowded backfield right now. With some of these other guys returning. And so, again, he's one in special teams. Special teams is going to be big for him, but I like the concept of bringing on more runners and seeing what you got, because last year you mentioned, the usage was crazy. I don't know what they were thinking. Like, that's crazy to me that you have all these guys like Kamara, Jimmy Graham, Taysom Hill, and you don't put them in a position to succeed. Like, it's baffling. It's mind-boggling. Like, it doesn't. And so again, Clint Kubiak is hopefully going to change that, and we see a lot more production, because I think Alvin's kind of had some down years, and he needs to rebound and stuff because he is getting a little bit older, and so they want to make it work with him. And I think he can still affect the game a lot, but they need him to do it. So all right, last one we're going to talk about, one of the late ones that they had, because they originally announced all the ones on Saturday, and then they added Trahan Jeffcoat, edge from Arkansas. Mizzou transfer. He played one season with the Razorbacks, was last season. Led this team with 29 pressures, 18 quarterback hurries. He's 6'4", 281, which is very comparable to Cam Jordan. He can rush, not just necessarily a guy with his hand in the ground, but he stands up when he rushes as well. He'll drop in coverage too. Really, the big thing that I looked at for him was the tape against Alabama, which he went up against J.C. Latham. And Latham, again, for whatever reason, you can take it as two ways. J.C. Latham is really good. That's one of the reasons why I really liked him. Or he just didn't get enough on Latham to be a factor. But I think that was my big thing with him, is looking at SEC level competition. Didn't really stand out too much in that aspect. But another edge guy, I want to see more from him, because that's what I ultimately compare it to is what do you do against the NFL level style of offensive tackle? And Latham is a guy. So your thoughts on him?
I think he's going to learn a lot from Cam Jordan that might be able to benefit him for his future, whether that future's in the NFL or elsewhere. One of my biggest things with him is that he's a hand fighter. And that's that can go both ways, right? Like you can be a really good hand fighter, but if you're sitting here hand fighting and you're not moving your legs, you're not going anywhere. You can hand fight all day, but if you're not pushing towards the quarterback, then you're not getting after the quarterback. And that to me was one of those things that kind of stood out on tape. So he'll sit there and hand fight, and he's engaged more in the battle with the tackle than he is engaged with getting past the tackle into the quarterback. Sometimes is what it feels like. I know that's not true. I know that that's not actually what's going on in his head, but it's just that like that's what it looks like. And so you want to see him develop a little bit further in terms of that. And I think Cam's one of the better hand fighters in the NFL, like some of the most violent hands in the NFL. Still to this day, you're going to see on 94. And so I think that that's something that I think goes a long way in terms of maybe helping him develop a little bit. So I think that would be kind of the next step thing that I would be looking for, from him. But I think one of the things that's super fun to watch on his tape is how tightly he runs an arc. So running an arc when you're a defensive end is all about trying to get around the tackle into the quarterback. So when he's not stuck hand fighting and he's on the move, he wraps so tightly, and you want to try to take that angle and that curve as tightly as possible so that you can diminish the amount of steps you have to take to get to that quarterback. And he runs the arc really, really tightly.
Yeah. And that's going to be important for him early on and stuff. And so I don't want to call him raw by any means, but again, I think you learn from a guy like Cam Jordan, you learn from a guy like Todd Grantham, and it's going to help you in a lot of ways. And so again, you got to come in here and do it. But again, you watch that tape against Alabama, you'll probably see the same thing that I saw and stuff. And again, he just needs to push towards the play, and if he's late in the play, that's the concerns I have. But again, what do we know? What do we know about any of these guys?
Yeah, right. I do appreciate that he was voted a team captain immediately upon stepping at Arkansas. I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it speaks well. I mean, Sincere Ainsworth was a captain at Tulane. I mean, he's one of four. I mean, in a lot of
leadership's his brand, man. For real.
And it's voted on by the players. I mean, that's a big deal that they vote on the players as captains. And so, I mean, it does count for something for sure. And so, I don't know, but all 16 undrafted rookies. I think that's right. They announced 15, and then Jeffcoat was 16, right? And I think my math's there. But all 16
plus 1 is 16
previewed. It's last I checked. Carry the five. No, I'm just kidding. But man, already time's flying. I don't know how these things just go so quickly, man. I just don't, and it just feels like time stands still sometimes. But Ross, man, I want to give you a chance. Make sure you follow and subscribe to Locked On Saints, first of all. But what you got coming up over there, and anything fun you're writing about?
Individual episodes on every single rookie. That's what we're doing right now. So we've got our Spencer Rattler episode out working right now, or got our Taliesin Fuanga episode out today. Tomorrow's Kool-Aid McKinstry. Very excited to break him down, and then we'll just continue to roll through the free agency, or excuse me, not the free agency class, the draft class, and then we'll get into undrafted free agents. But I want you to have like one episode that you can go to and kind of get everything that you need on each individual prospect. So that's what we're going to be working on, with some cutoffs here and there where there's news and stuff like that. But that'll be the work coming up there. And then just put out a new piece today, kind of laying out the value that the Saints got on a Spencer Rattler selection at 150. Took a look at 8 of the best and most notable NFL draft experts out there, and how he was ranked pre-draft, and then looked at where the Saints got him. Boy, they got some value. So you can check out those pieces. I did that for the top 3 selections. You can go and check that out over at Saints News Network.
What about you, man? Taliesin Fuanga. Taliesin Fuanga. That's how you pronounce it. It's Taliesin Fuanga. It's like there's a silent N that doesn't actually belong there. So
it's a very light N too. Don't bite all the way down on it.
Yeah, so don't do it like, as it's like Taliesin Fuanga, Taliesin Fuanga. See, I told you I'd get it. I told you
got it. You nailed it.
Yeah. But yeah, so for me, it's just I wrote up all my previews on undrafted guys, and so now it's kind of, keep looking into this draft class and see what happens. We got, obviously, going to interview all of these guys at some point and talk to them. So we've got 4 down, and there's 12 to go.
12 more to go. See, your math is so good, dude.
Look, it's that Lafayette education I had. Some, Como High School, shout out. But at any rate, so doing that, and so obviously that, and we're going to find some stuff to write about. But rookie mini camp is next weekend, not this weekend, but next weekend. So we'll be at that. It's 3-day mini camp for tryouts too, which we didn't get too much into. But if you check the tracker on Saints News, you'll find all the players that we've run down and see what they do. So, that's really about it. Nothing crazy exciting. I'm just glad that I could breathe and get some sleep and recover a little bit. And now I'm back to energized mode. So
There you
you
go.
never know what's going to come out from me in the next couple of days. So hopefully some fun stuff. But guys, we really appreciate you tuning in. As always, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. That'll do it for us today. We'll be back soon enough to talk some more Saints football and probably Saints football. So,
Yeah.
guys, have a good one. We appreciate you tuning in. All the best.